I make a ton of mistakes when using my 3D pen. These mistakes mean that I have a lot of wasted plastic material. Not to mention all the leftover coils of filament that are generally too small to use. Since I tend to be a pack rat, and I couldn't bring myself to just throw it all in the trash, I ended up saving all this waste. Then I saw an inspirational post on Reddit on how to recycle it. This post mentioned using silicone molds to bake them into various shapes. I thought this might pair well with 3D pens and being able to build off these recycled plastic shapes. I decided to give it a try and it ended up working out really well. I'm going to take you through my experiments with this process and show you how I got to the final results. Hopefully it gives you some ideas of what you can do with your 3D pen waste. I found these decent looking Star Wars silicone molds on Amazon. 7 different figures are provided. I ended up getting a dedicated toaster oven to do all my plastic melting inside because I felt it would be the safer way to go. In order to get the settings and process dialed in, I started out chopping up some of my leftover coils of filament and using the small Darth Vader mold. Note that I only use PLA filament all throughout this video. Once you've filled the mold, you want to be sure to pack it as tightly as possible. I thought this came out pretty well for the very first test, despite all the tiny little bubbles that formed on the mold side. I decided to try baking the second attempt for longer, to try to let the bubbles rise to the surface and out of the mold. The second attempt had way more bubbles. Time to try something else. Next, I wanted to use canola oil spray as a mold release agent, hoping it would help prevent bubbles from developing. At this point, I also wanted to use the larger pieces of plastic waste that I had. To do that, you need to break them up into smaller pieces so they fit in the molds better and melt easily. Smashing up the larger chunks with a hammer works so-so. I've seen others look into using paper shredders or other types of grinders. But even after smashing with a hammer, I had to trim down a lot of pieces using my flush cutters. Remember that bin full of waste I showed earlier? This is the result after smashing and trimming it all down. A lot less than I thought, which I guess is a good thing. Here I'm coating the mold with the canola oil spray I talked about earlier. Aha! Now we're getting some better results. There are less bubbles and the surface finish is better. Next I was going to try baking it for less time to give the bubbles less time to form. These are some shots comparing the tests that I've done so far. You can also see the plastic doesn't come close to filling the mold. So I also wanted to test adding in a second round of waste PLA to make sure that doesn't mess anything up. The mold got coated from the canola oil overspray that got baked in. So yeah, better prevent that next time. But don't forget to remove the tape before you bake it in the oven. Here's a good example of the mold not filling well, and why it's a good idea to try adding a second round of waste on top. This is the best result yet. The fewest amount of bubbles and a decent surface finish. We're ready to go big now. The results look so much better than our earlier attempts. Side note, these time lapses also look really cool when you play them backwards. Alright, let's go for the big one. Refill and back in the oven. One funny thing that happened during this final round was this bubble that formed, which I tried to pop, but it basically just resealed itself and wouldn't go away. Luckily it's on the bottom side, which won't be seen. For this being a much bigger mold, I was super happy with how this came out. It does still have a few bubbles, but they blend in well with the mix of colors, and the mold side details are really well resolved. In terms of cleanup coming out of the mold, it's just a little trimming, and then some smoothing to round out those edges. Here's a comparison shot of all 5 together. The really fun part about this is that these are all solid blocks of PLA, so we can use our 3D pen and other modeling techniques to build on top of them. For example, simply coloring in Boba Fett's visor to make it pop more. Painting and other coloring is definitely possible. And all our other 3D pen tricks are available, like using a hot knife to cut out his antenna. These 2 fairly simple techniques really made his model pop more. And as I said, you can easily use your 3D pen to build off these models. Here I'm going to make them into something useful for my desk. A simple bracket to connect the 2, and then a little bit of cleanup smoothing. I use post-it notes to keep track of everything, so my desk is generally a mess. I figured I'd turn these into a stand to hold my pads of post-it notes to make them easier to find. I thought it was pretty cool to turn my waste scraps of PLA into something useful and cool looking. I'd also been planning to turn the Millennium Falcon into an SD card holder, but it came out so pretty that I just couldn't mess with it. Another idea to make them into something useful is to turn them into fridge magnets. I'm excited to see what y'all can come up with. A few words about safety. I've seen others use their main kitchen oven or toaster oven to melt plastic in. I personally didn't feel comfortable doing this in something that my family and I cook food in. If you want to try this, I'd definitely recommend getting a dedicated toaster oven so that you don't have to worry about mixing plastic and food. This does generate some smoke and a plasticky smell, so be sure to do this in a well-ventilated area. As with most things on my channel, be sure to use the proper safety precautions and protective gear. Be safe, people. And there you have it. I turned my 3D pen waste into some fun and useful objects. I'm curious, do many of you save your 3D pen waste, or am I the only one? Maybe I've given you a reason to save it now. I'd love to hear what you think of this video, so leave me a comment down below. If you're interested in learning how to use a 3D pen, check out this tutorials playlist, which covers all skill levels. Finally, don't forget to subscribe for more 3D pen content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.